Welcome to this week's edition of Walter Rodney Groundings, the television organ of the Working People's Alliance. This week we are dealing with perhaps the biggest news item of the last, I would say the last year or so, but more so over the last couple of weeks. And I'm talking about the Amila Falls Hydro Project. We are going to do an in-depth analysis of the project and all the controversies surrounding that project. And I have to say that I could not find a more qualified panel to deal with that issue. My guests this evening are Professor Clive Thomas, co-leader of the Working People's Alliance and longtime professor of economics at the University of Guyana, Mr. Carl Greenidge of the People's National Congress and economic spokesperson for the Partnership for National Unity Coalition in the National Assembly, and himself a long-time international economist. And Mr. Christopher Ram, a chartered accountant and a political commentator who has made a name for himself dealing with issues of the economy and finance. Gentlemen, welcome to Walter Rodney Groundings.
Thank you very much.
Clive, let me start with you, Professor Thomas. Why is this issue of Amila such a big issue? Now, this is an issue that is economic in nature, but why has it taken on the legs that it has taken on and become perhaps the biggest issue, as I said, over the last year or so?
Yeah, I think for two reasons, David. First of all, most people who study Guyana or even study the rest of the wider Caribbean believe that energy, being able to deliver sustainable energy at a low price or low cost to the consumer, is the single most perhaps important infrastructural investment a country can make in terms of being able to transform its ability to produce goods and services and to increase the quality of life. So Amila falls into that category of effort. The second reason is that having made that commitment to recognize the importance of the transformative value of sustainable energy is not the same thing as choosing a particular project to fulfill that. That has to be the subject of another set of decisions. It has to be the basis of some sort of systematic thinking and evaluation of the project in order to establish that it can deliver what we expect of it in a timely manner, efficient manner, and particularly the cost that the consumers can bear. And we might also add that an economic cost that the country as a whole can bear, because these investments very often require large sums of money to be expended up front with the expectation of delivery of benefits well into the future.
So there's the linkage there between the individual product and the larger economy that will then have consequences for social or the social sectors, etc. Carl, is there anything you want to add to what CY said?
No, I would endorse what CY says. The Amila is extremely important. Infrastructure in general is very important. Those Guyanese that are reflecting on what has happened to us over the last 2.5, 3 decades would realize the disappearance of the manufacturing sector. That is almost directly linked to the high cost of energy and the unreliability of energy. To the extent that power is delivered at a price that is excessively high, which is the case at the moment, it makes our industries uncompetitive internationally. So it has that sort of implication with all the consequences for income and the welfare and well-being of the public.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Just one point on what Professor Thomas said about the importance of the electricity to the economy as a whole. Many of the key sectors of the economy, however, are not energy reliant. Gold and diamond, forestry, rice, sugar. So yes, for the manufacturing sector and the agro-industrial sector, yes. But for many of the key sectors of the economy, it is not as important as it would be, in my view, in certain other.
Yeah, but I think it may be a mistake to say that because they are energy dependent. But the type of energy that they are depending on is really fossil-based fuel. And that is why we have to continue pursuing the search for oil, because we have to be able to deliver the means to run the equipment on the mines particularly small-scale mining, even large-scale mining, in a way that can be done effectively and cost-efficient. But the point which I want to make to link to the projects that we spoke about earlier, the Amila project and what Carl said, is that we have a situation where when this project comes on stream, that GPL has already committed itself publicly to producing about 1/3 of its present capacity, if not maybe 1/2, as it goes on. Now, for the project to work successfully, it has to win over the same manufacturing sectors that are now using standby equipment to generate their energy. Now, how can you tell this manufacturing sector that you need standby in case the hydropower doesn't work efficiently and that they should not keep a standby? So the task of being able to win them over is an enormous task, and I suspect what is going to happen is that the government is going to use a lot of intimidatory means to get the private sector to do that. So in a sense, what the private sector is engaged in now, in view of their short-term support of the government in this matter, will be down to their disadvantage in the medium to long term when they face all those pressures to get them to come off from the backup power. And so they've been exceedingly short-sighted. But that's the characteristic of, I think, of all Guyanese. Because I have estimated that 3 weeks from now we can stop talking about.
Well, I hope we don't. I hope we don't. And there's a commitment on the part of the WPA to ensure that this conversation continues.
Yeah, but remember the commitment. You already forgot one part of the commitment. The commitment is to recognize that the two most important contemporary issues are the money laundering and the hydropower. But we haven't mentioned money laundering yet. So it's a serious. We could get into a discussion and forget that.
Right. Clive, and you mentioned the government. I counted 4 times you made reference to the government. Is there a linkage between Amila and what we loosely call today governance?
Yes, there's a very strong linkage. I mean, there's a direct linkage, and there are lots of indirect linkages. Because the government creates the environment within which these activities take place, and that is why, in my effort to produce the document for WPA, which I hope we can advertise, the study that we produced.
We are advertising.
I framed it in the background of a larger study on how we manage government's public investment program. Because there's only one section of that larger document which will be made available now next series of publications in another week or two.
Carl, the linkage to governance?
The linkage has to do with decision making and the way that the decision making affects resource allocation. This is a classic area in economics. You have, over the years, just to put it in historical context, a great concern over the way that the government make decisions about investment. There's a sequence, in economics, there's a sequence that is logical in terms of carrying out undertaking investments. And you should seek to sequence them in accordance with some logic, okay? And also to choose to invest in a particular area based upon minimum costs. You don't expend more money than you need to. You try to find a package that will solve a specific problem. What you have is a government that seems committed to taking decisions based upon either entirely political considerations, private financial considerations, and other extraneous matters. So you've ended up in a situation here with the hydro where, having examined a range of projects over the years, pre-PPP, in the PPP times in the 1990s, agreeing that a certain framework would be appropriate. In other words, if you like, a network of hydros. If you're going to not take Upper Maz or one of the bigger projects, you take a network of smaller hydros on a specific watershed, okay, which will enable you to make the best use of the infrastructure, because the transmission lines are expensive, they go a long way. In those circumstances, the government somehow gets diverted by an offer from one person closely related to them, and all the others are forgotten, and you have the whole country down the road mobilizing in a manner to facilitate that project without reference to what it was doing before, without reference to a proper map. Close to this particular project is to be a major mine. That major mine, they are obliged to put in place some form of hydro. I have not seen a document or a policy that says, look, this is part of an integrated energy project on this river, and this project is phase 2, this project is phase 1, this is how they interconnect. When you make decisions in a rather arbitrary manner or self-serving manner that the government makes, it has significance for governance. Governance has to do with people being able to anticipate predictable decision-making taken in the national interest. Okay, not things that arise on the basis of something that comes up yesterday or who you can persuade, who you can fool. We are almost, at times, seem to be into a con game.
Yeah, but I think the reason for that, if I may,
Go ahead,
because
go
I
ahead.
know
Sure.
Chris should talk, is that the government feels that when it spends money, this money is like manna falling from heaven. They don't realize that every cent the government spends, it has to collect from us citizens or borrow and pay back eventually. So every cent that the government expends has to come forced from taxation or from borrowing.
And it should be spent better than we spend it,
of course
otherwise
has,
it's
otherwise
inefficient.
it's inefficient. So the government never approaches spending with any notion of inefficiency. It's a manna from heaven, so they can do what they want with it and they rationalize it after. That is a fundamental weakness.
Chris?
Well, it's the largest single investment, and I think
By a
that's
long way.
accepted.
By a long way.
If we are underwriting this, and it's full of risks, otherwise we wouldn't have all these added costs about political risk, insurance, etc. So the issue requires the widest possible, forget 149C just for a moment, it requires the widest possible consultation and examination. Yet for some reason it appears as though the center and the only place of decision making in all of this is the National Assembly.
Yeah.
Side said once they got the political parties really didn't matter to anybody else. Now as a citizen and a member of civil society, and we've been following the media, just about everybody has said, look, you need to be very careful as to how technical grounds, financial grounds, economic grounds, just about every ground. And we seem to be ignoring those things.
Yes. In case you're just joining us, this is Walter Rodney Groundings. I'm David Hines. And this evening we're talking economics for everyone. This
Just going down.
It used to be, Clive Thomas made that popular in the 1980s. We had a publication called Open Word, and we had the economics for everyone, and we're coming back today for economics for everyone. You see, this government thrives on what they think is the fact that the ordinary people can't understand these policy issues. And what we're doing here this afternoon is we're having this conversation on Walter Rodney Groundings in a way to involve you, in a way that you can understand the implications of this Amila thing for your everyday life. And as we've heard, just in the first few minutes of the program, the linkages between Amila and the rest of the economy. And as we just heard, Amila and governance, and Amila and the money you pay as taxes. So it's very important that we continue to discuss these issues. I said earlier that the WPA plans to broaden this discourse. We are not giving up on this Amila things because we think that it has large implications. We're going to start that process this Friday, August the 16th, that's Friday coming, at 5:30 p.m. at St. Stanislaus Auditorium. We'll have a symposium, and the major presenters would be Professor Clive Thomas and Mr. Carl Greenwich, two of my guests here this evening, and Dr. Rishit Thakur from the University of Guyana. We're inviting everyone to come out to that symposium. It will be a symposium where you'll hear the presentations, but we will leave sufficient time for a discussion among those who are present. So mark that date. It's Friday coming, 5:30 at the St. Stanislaus Auditorium. Let's get back to the discussion here. Mr. Greenwich, walk us through the history of this project, because Amila is not something that started last year.
No, not by any means. I'd be happy to give it in as simple a manner as I can. The concern with energy has been with us for a long time, even into the 1920s, and hydro in particular. In the 1970s, 1976, you had a review of all the major sites, Montreal Engineering, looked at all the major sites. There were 22 of them in all, and identified the characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and so forth. The issue I think that confronts us is that whilst we have many sites, many attractive sites, the major sites are quite a significant distance from the consumption center, that is from Georgetown, the coast in general, but Georgetown and Demerara in particular. And that poses a challenge because it means whatever you do, you have to lay down long transmission lines. That is expensive infrastructure, like putting down a railway line, and you have to have 3 or 4 or 5 railway engines and thus to be using it, so that the cost is not borne by 10 people traveling on one railway carriage. Now, the bigger the project, as I remember the numbers, the lower the cost of generation per kilowatt hours. That has really been that's the characteristic of the sites. But there are some exceptions. In the case of this government and where we've arrived at in relation to Amila, in the 1990s, the government was examining what it should do about a hydro in particular. And I believe at that time they were looking at 2 or 3 projects that could be grouped together on the Pataro that would provide the medium and long-term needs of the country. Basically, you needed to move from, let us say, a consumption level of 80 megawatts, which was matched by generation that was unreliable, very expensive for all sorts of reasons, and therefore the idea was that you would develop 2 or 3 sites phased over time, Chumari, Amila, and some others. And in the process, you would be able to satisfy the requirements perhaps to a level of 200 or 300 megawatts, 200 to 300 megawatts, and in excess, because you have a situation of what might be called suppressed demand. Whilst then it was 80 megawatts, and at the moment you're close to 100 megawatts in use. That is because it isn't available more abundantly. If more power were available more reliably, a lot of the businesses that currently are off the system would utilize. And so it was expected that that would be how the government would move. It would put together to the public an idea of a network or a system of hydros that would generate power in keeping with the increased demand that was likely to flow from further developments in industry, developments in the mining sector, more manufacturing, and so forth. To our great surprise, you had this phenomenon of a license being given to Mr. Motilal for the development of the Amila site. That was all that was being discussed at the time. That is as early as 2002. He was given the license to do that and apparently was unable to go anywhere with it. It was renewed, I believe, 11 times. Okay? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, if you remember, in 2009, the government announced that it was in discussions with Brazil to develop the Tibuku site. That was a site of about 700 megawatts, which is far in excess of what we need now. But the idea was that 200 would be available to the country immediately. The rest would be sold to Brazil, so you get an income from it. They would take the risk, they would underwrite it, and whilst that is in place, you would develop whatever other site you need to. That was announced, and it died a death. Nothing has happened to it, but the government is running, and has been running, with the Amila. In the case of Amila, the developments have taken place in this way. The license seemed to be illegally contracted at some point to Scythe Global. That's one thing. Secondly, the cost estimates that were coming out of, first of all, Motilal, and then of Scythe Global, have moved from, I think at one stage, 245, 345 million, 500 million. On July the 17th, the government gave us a document saying it was 840 million. When Scythe... 838. No.
834. That document was 834.
Okay, 834. In the space of 2 weeks, when Scythe saw us on July the 31st, it had moved to 858. And when in fact we had the documents before us, we raised it before Scythe raised that. We saw that before. So the cost has inflated enormously, and the issue there, if I might just close there, the issue here is the overall cost of the project. That is a big issue here, and it has to be because it is the most expensive hydro facility being put in place on a per kilowatt basis. In other words, for every kilowatt that it's going to generate, it costs as much as 4.5 times more than any other current project being currently looked at. That is problematic because it reflects itself in the cost eventually that the consumer will have to bear. We already have one of the highest rates in the world of electricity. We cannot afford to take so much money, put it into a project that is so large, and have a massive project like that generate electricity at prices above those that we currently pay. We cannot. And it isn't as though we haven't had experience with the government promising us that things are being efficiently done, when in fact the heart of all of these contracts, the site global order, the multi-lateral contract for the road, and the contract for the dam has the same characteristics. Questionable award of contract as the hospital, the specialty hospital, as the Skeldon, and Chedi and all the others. The heart of these things turns on the manner, governance, in which contracts are awarded, and that has to be reflected in the price that is delivered. But in this case, for Amila, the development right now is that whilst the government is talking about reduced costs, we are unable to get a guarantee from a credible source. Mr. Neither Ramutar, nor Hines, nor Ashni Singh's are credible sources in this case, nor could I be, as to the final price that will be at which power will be delivered to the consumer.
And Carl, you preempted my next question.
Sorry about that.
And that's fine. That's fine. It's it shows that we're flowing. And what I was, all three of you here have been vocal in your opposition to the project. See why you went perhaps furthest in saying scrap the thing? No, you know,
because I feel fundamentally it's misconceived.
Right.
If I could develop the point that Carl made. The reason why we have a high kilowatt cost per hour is because the scale of the project is not adequate for the investment that we are contemplating. We should have a much larger scheme running into, I said, 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts. But if you're going to confine it to 165 or whatever it is, the average cost per kilowatt hour is going to be very high. And Amila was always conceived of, in the very beginning, as you see implying here, to be part of a multi-stage project. It included, I think, was Tortuga, and sand landing on the Mazruni. And there have been also recommendations of some people to divert some of the water going to Kite Shore without impairing its natural beauty, to advance and facilitate a bigger set of megawatt hours coming out of the hydro facility. So the project has been fundamentally misconceived. And I happen to know, because I spoke to the persons concerned, that at the very outset, the same minister that is in charge of hydropower, but the minister was vehemently against Amila because he recognized the logic of it. He's not a fool, but we don't know what pressures have developed or what has passed on to the table or over the table. So all those things we have to contemplate, because they're not reasons that are so far-fetched that we can't consider them. There must be some extraneous influence that would make people, in the face of all this evidence, still pursue relentlessly the notion that this is a worthwhile project.
And Carl may
nobody can be reasonable and see.
Carl may have hinted when he said that, you know, the way in which the government conceives of these projects in political terms. Right. Christopher, I know
just briefly on that issue, when you look at the documents that flowed between the government and Mr. Motilal, it anticipated as a development in a modular fashion. First from 100, so it had a capacity for 1060, 1,060 megawatt. But in stages 100, 450, 1060. For some reason, that has now been taken off the table, and we're into just a single phase project. And that makes it so
I think
costly.
the reason why it's Site Global, because Site Global sees us as easy pickings. Just look at the money. Can you imagine what it really would cost? Let your average consumer think out there. They have to pay a rate of interest of 8.5% per annum. That means in about, what, I would say,
In the 20 years,
in
he estimates
4,
800 million?
3 to
60
4
million.
years you pay back, and in terms of compound interest, you're paying back the money that you borrow. When a company wants a return of 19% per annum, it takes them 19 into 100 for nearly around 5 years to return back the money.
And this is a project with a government guarantee, so there's absolutely no
Nothing to
reason
lose, yeah.
for that kind of rate of interest,
And
which
then
will reflect risk.
And I'm glad you talk about the guarantee, because the guarantee that they're talking about in the parliament is a diversion. The government always carries a contingent liability for certain types of obligations, because they have to protect the estate. You know, for example, when a commercial bank lends to private individuals, the commercial bank has to rely on the private individuals to pay them back. But if there's a threat of the banking system failing, then the government takes on that liability, as is the case of Ireland. So it becomes a government obligation, and then it's an entirely different thing, because the investors come at you not in terms of law, but in terms of the market, which is much more powerful sometimes than law. And you have to respond to it, so that if the project failed, whatever the government says, whether the ceiling is 5 million, 2 million, 1 million, nothing, they will still be responsible once they have to keep this economy afloat to repay the investors.
So that debt ceiling thing that we've been talking about.
It's a sham.
It's a sham.
Sham,
It's
yeah.
a sham. Well, you heard it here on a scam, a sham. You've heard it here on Walter Rodney Groundings. In case you're just joining us, we're discussing the Amila Falls hydro project, the whole issue around it, the controversy around it. And as you heard Professor Thomas there, one of the things that you've learned over the last couple of weeks about this thing called the debt ceiling, Professor Thomas is saying it's a sham. It's a scam, because whether you raise the debt ceiling or not, the government will still be responsible.
Because of the market forces.
Because of market forces. This is Walter Rodney Groundings, and as I said, Amila Falls. My guests today are Christopher Ram, Carl Greenidge, Clive Thomas, and you couldn't ask for a better team to really discuss this issue. We're going to take this conversation on the road. You're hearing it here. We're taking it on the road on Friday. The WPA is sponsoring a symposium at the St. Stanislaus College, the auditorium, at 5:30. 5:30 on Friday. Friday coming, August 16, at St. Stanislaus Auditorium. We'll be discussing this at length. This is, in a sense, a little sneak peek you're getting here tonight. We call it economics for everyone, because we feel that these issues, while you may think they're distant from your lives, they're actually not. That's part of what we're trying to get over here in this exercise. Professor Clive Thomas has written a study of Amila Falls, a comprehensive study. It's in book form. It's called The Political Economy of the Amila Falls Project, 8 essays. And that is on sale. It will be on sale at the forum on Friday. But you can call the WPA office to order an advance copy, 227-4608, 227-4608, if you want an advance copy of that study done by Professor Thomas. And of course, as I keep saying, we're taking this on the road. First stop is at St. Stanislaus on Friday at 5:30. Gentlemen, we've talked about the reason that you are so vehemently opposed, and I think all of you have made the case why this is an important issue, and why is it that in its present state that we should not go forward with this project. Now, there was a kind of, and I hesitate to call it a bombshell, but certainly the country must have been taken by surprise when Site Global, the developer that is connected with the project, pulled out of the project 2 days ago. First, were you all surprised? And second, what are the consequences of that? Carl, you want to start us off?
Yes, thanks very much, David. I wasn't surprised, because Scythe had indicated in writing in the document that I mentioned a little while ago, and Chris had endorsed. They made reference, I think, on pages 13 and pages 19 of the document, to their own concern. They wanted the government to support the project, which it was, of course, but they wanted all the political parties in Parliament to agree to the project. And they said there, if this wasn't the case, they would withdraw. Let me just take a second to explain to you what happened in that exchange with Site Global. Site Global had worded their requirement in such a way that it implied, first of all, that the debt ceiling, okay, and the set-aside were conditions that they themselves were requiring of the project, and it implied that if those two conditions weren't met, the project couldn't be successful. We told them we found the wording unacceptable. They agreed to amend that wording. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes.
However, they were adamant that they weren't prepared to go ahead. Let me now answer your question more directly. The reason why I was not surprised is this. Site Global recognizes that there is built into this project an agreement that they will be paid the very fees that CY is making reference to. They will have a stream of income for 20 years. This government, you can't guarantee that it will be there for 20 more years. What is more likely, no, well, I'm coming. Even less likely, the chances are that they may not even serve out the term. The problem is if a new government comes in, they will look at a project like this, which is controversial, and they may wish to revisit the financing. That's what SITE recognizes. And unlike other multinationals in the past that might have taken the opportunity and say, well, we'll sit tight, we'll go and drag in the government of the United States or wherever to come and rough up this new government if it chooses to revisit. They have stated their position up front and have sat back having announced it. Now, the question is, in a country where, or the point is that in a country where the commitment to the word, we've had many instances of either officials, public or political officials, claiming that they will resign in the event that they didn't get A or B and they're not going anyplace. I think SITE is to be commended for taking this position, but it is a position that has to do with their self-interest. It's nothing else. And to me, that's quite understandable, so I wasn't surprised.
But I think there's one other point which you should probably mention. I know it may not be a popular point, but I personally believe that Site Global knows to itself that this project is much more risky than it looks. Because they have said that the low end of their requirements for a project of this risk is a 19% return, which means they're getting back the money in about 5 years and a quarter, a short period of time. And yet they consider it low at the low end. So they know the considerable risk that is involved in a project like this. And I believe that that's an added consideration which we have to take in.
I wasn't surprised because it was a project that they were finding increasingly difficult to justify.
That's right.
But what I was disappointed in the contents of their statement. For example, they said that we comprehensively considered the Amila Falls project. The information is not there. If you were to ask the shareholders agreement, the power purchase agreement, the operation and maintenance agreement, none of those things is there. So there's no comprehensive document. There's in the power purchase agreement, which is just in draft, all you have is a formula dealing with costs. So when we hear about the sea level...
If you look at that document carefully, the section that should deal with the power purchase agreement is marked, at least in the document I saw, deliberately excluded.
Yeah, but there is a draft power purchase agreement.
No, but there is, but that was not given. What was given, the cost, totaling cost for the project, not the pricing cost.
No, what I saw cost. I saw a document with a cost.
If you look, both you say it's not complete, which is
but
what
it's not
matters.
complete.
That is
Right.
what
It's not
matters.
complete.
Yeah, even that document.
I also felt that, look, yesterday they said we had hoped that the project's 40 to 91% reduction to power prices for consumers. That is completely fictitious. As a matter of fact, a statement issued today out of the office of the president is now saying that we will get a 20% reduction after 2 years, within 2 years of commercial operations. So almost every day, every time a figure comes out, you get something different. And I was a little offended, as I said, by the contents, and they were saying everybody approved of it, virtually all other non-partisan organizations. Well,
But I found it insulting that they would come here. I blame our politicians in large measure, not you
I have to take the blame of the others.
specifically, that they would allow Site Global, an audience of that type, and people writing about this project had never gotten together in the brain trust with the political elites in this country. Even if it's all party, not only just opposition, nobody has sought to bring together the persons with the skills and knowledge of what is taking place into any gathering. And they held this gathering in the august premises of the National Assembly. I mean, I don't want to go further than that.
Yes.
Well, see, well, let me just
The
help
only
you.
place I've ever had a discussion specific to
Amila.
Amila is with a committee I'm on with Carl and in the WPA.
Well, let me
Within
just,
the larger councils of politics, nowhere.
in defense of the politicians, let me just say something, and it is important to this point that's being raised here. The Economic Services Committee met, decided that it wanted to look at GPL, and some people raised the hydro. It was agreed that the Economic Services Committee would go through that exercise. In the course of the Economic Services meeting on GPL, we were told these people are here, they would like a discussion. The Economic Service Committee has not even completed its examination of GPL, and we've arrived at a position in which people are announcing. People are announcing that this project, the hydro, has been embraced. The Parliament has not examined in detail anything like the hydro project, and let me say again, a document constituting a policy and project document on hydro has never been before the Parliament. The Parliament has been asked to examine two documents. One is on a set-aside, which is to do with land, and the other one is a motion, which has to do with the debt guarantee, which some people believe is illegal. In any case, the guarantee they're seeking can't be provided in the framework that they're asking for it. And yet, they have the temerity, the government has the temerity, the president and NISIL have the temerity to suggest that there's been a comprehensive examination. There has been no examination in Parliament.
Site Global is also rude. They come here to this country. They've never met. I mean, maybe they met with the one Christian son, but they've never met.
that was
as
at the
far
public
as I know,
symposium.
with even the university, let's say the university critics, academia. They've never even sought a meeting with the people who are commenting on the matter to get their opinion on why it is they take these positions.
Yes.
That's an intelligent approach. I mean, you don't want to get rid of.
So what we have here, we're talking about consultation in the country. We have enough experts. I think Clive is being a little bit modest there. We have enough experts in this country who can deal with these issues, and the government has not sought, and if the opposition also, they have not sought to bring together our own experts to consult. We hear about waiting for the IDB to sign off and so forth.
Not the APNU. The APNU has consulted.
The APNU was consulted. The APNU was consulted widely. And look, you're home and you're looking at this project, and what we hope is that you're understanding today how important this project is to your situation in your village, in your ward, in the town, and so forth. And we hope that we can come to where you are to extend this discussion. The WPA certainly has endeavored to do that, and we hope some of the other political parties would do that, because these are issues that we need to discuss as a people, so we get a feel and understanding of how these things are hooked in to the rest of the economy and to our own lives as ordinary citizens. Now, even before Scythe pulled out, there was a vote in Parliament, and everyone was excited, or some people were excited, because the government got one of the opposition parties to vote with it, and so authorize the project, at least in its initial stages. Were you all surprised that that's how things turned out? Who wants to start there? Guy?
All right.
Well, I can start
Yeah.
there. It's probably easier for me because I've always been making the point that it does not surprise me if the FC can turn 360 degrees on a dime, or cent piece, as they call it. Because I said a party founded in the opportunism of the FC is a party that I fundamentally always have a reservation about. You know, it's not just that they're founded out of groups that belong to other parties, but the manner in which they preserved their hold in the other parties to gain representation in Parliament is the thing that I found most dishonest. So I was not surprised altogether that they would diverge from the position of the rest of the opposition on this particular matter. I wasn't totally surprised, although I was bitterly disappointed. I was disappointed also for some of the things that have come out since. So I have to also mention that. But it shows the nature of our politics, because coming out of such a basic decision, I think the country as a whole has lost. You know, in the face of a multinational trying to maneuver a government, and a government trying to maneuver it, and both of them playing hold me loosely within national economic governance, the country has lost a lot. There's been a fundamental breakdown on our way, seeing our way forward over this project. And I think we will live to regret the events that have transpired over these recent weeks in the long term.
Carl?
I wasn't surprised when the first vote was held and the opposition parties voted together. At that point, there was no reason to expect that this matter would be reversed in such a short period of time. In fact, the reversal makes a mockery of parliamentary rules, the standing orders, and, if you like, the sanctity of decisions. If you can be overturning decisions when nothing has changed in the current circumstances, it brings into question the seriousness of the Parliament. Let me say, however, in terms of looking a little bit about some of the subjective factors, the government was, in a way, played the opposition very well here, in that they threw into the mix, or they arose in the same time, contemporaneously in time, the issue of local government and some other questions, which the parties regard as important. And the question of promising to deliver on A, if only you give an ease on B. I don't want to go on a blow-by-blow account of that, but that, I think, very much complicated matters. But in the end, I agree with CY. A decision that would have been taken to take the most important economic project that faces us right now, the most costly project that faces us now, the project with the greatest implications for debt burden, for income, and for tax burden. We see what has happened in relation to Gaisuko. You come 1 year for 6 billion. In relation to GPL, you come in 1 year for 12 billion. This project could make that look like chicken feed, because it is far larger. It is not 200 million. You're talking about a project 5 times Gaisuko's project. So there are implications here for the public, and I hope that both the politicians and civil society will recognize that something important is afoot here and not allow us to be hoodwinked or tricked by way of hoaxes or various devices into supporting something that basically is not in the national interest.
Chris?
Well, there is nothing that I could have seen that could have caused that change on the part of the AFC within that period of time. Mr. Ramjatan, the leader of the AFC, sought to explain it to all he was doing was giving a lifeline to the project. He wasn't approving the project, and his party remains consistent to an earlier decision that it would await an assessment and evaluation by the IDB on the project as a whole. I think Clive has addressed that look, you know, they may be the IDB would be looking at a different set of terms of reference.
No, but it's bogus, because the IDB is a political institution.
Yes.
And it owns things, well, not political in that sense, of partisan political, but it owes Guyana for fighting to get the Caribbean vote in the favor of the current president. So that's a fundamental issue. So we can't see the IDB as a non-partisan player in regard to Guyana on this particular matter. So we have to approach the thing by accepting our primary responsibility to make the decision here in Guyana. That's what political leadership is about. You can't come in 2013 and tell me something that I would oppose in 1960, that you can let some foreign institution decide for you. I think it's insulting. It's almost as insulting as what transpired after, but I don't want to get into that now.
Site Global has pulled out. Does that mean that the project is dead?
Well,
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't mean that.
It doesn't.
So where do we go from here? Certainly those of us on this side of the debate who have been saying all along that this project is ill-conceived, this project really, we should not proceed with it as it is.
We have to keep saying that.
Uh-huh.
We have to keep saying that. We don't know. You know, treachery might be afoot
Yeah.
without them saying anything derogatory when people haven't really taken action. But we have to stand up for the principle that this project is ill-conceived. It raises so many issues of fundamental economic governance, at least me. And I would argue that within the confines of the WPA. And I figure that I can win that debate and that argument because I will have your backing.
Certainly you will.
So I would fight for that independent position. You know, cost it what it may, that we don't renege on our obligations to put this project in this place. It is always hard in a project like this to cut your losses because the losses loom large in the short run.
How much have they spent so far, the government?
The government is spending maybe about, they say about 20 million.
On the road.
On the road.
Largely on the road.
On the
Yes,
road.
largely on the
Yeah.
road. But the road is still there.
The
And it
road
can
is
be
being
used, yeah.
constructed.
Yeah.
Yes, and it can be used, right? So it's not
Yeah.
as if you're...
But it's not been designed specifically for some type
Commercial
of
traffic.
interior penetration, and therefore it's an economic loss because it's not a rational
Mhm,
decision. That's the best way to spend our money. So from that point of view, I think the country is lost, but we have to cut our losses. And in the short run, these will loom very large. I know so for the country. But I'm hopeful that coming out of this, it will be encourage a broader approach by all the political parties of the opposition, the government, everything, into trying to find a way forward in terms of the hydropower issue. That there be, at some way down the line, a constructive engagement in the pursuit of that, developing issues that was raised before, like, for example, the Brazilian effort. And I think these things need to be supervised by an all-party representation in the export decision-making process so that we could feel that the governance issues are being met. We don't suspect that something is being passed on the table. We expect that good decisions are being made. People are not pursuing the pursuit of building permits in their name so that they have a legacy to look after down the line. So that is what I would hope for.
Pyramids or white,
Carl?
or white elephants. There are a number of things that can come out of it. Clearly, no document specific to Amila has been put before the Parliament, so a document can be put. Now, I would hope that before the government moves to do something like that, and I'm making that in the context where the IDB will receive a document with all the details, which we will not have. As the Parliament, the comprehensiveness of a document, integrated document going to IDB is not matched by anything we will receive. That's the first point. But the point I want to make is that an approach towards hydro along the point that lines I made earlier and CY was endorsing is what is required now. The government can say, look, let's learn something from what has happened. Let's put this thing together properly. Let us consult, and consultation isn't merely calling people 2 or 3 times to say, look, this is what we're going to do. It has to do with taking into account their concerns and trying to modify or round or smoothen or improve the project where it lies. The question of overall supervision that's mentioned by CY, I absolutely embrace that. And the question of now finding other partners is cool. We I think, should not be frightened by that. If a package is properly put together, it will attract the financing. The Brazilians right now were looking at, recently were looking at a hydro which turned out to attract so much criticism that they had to revisit it. Criticisms from all quarters. You must not be afraid of that and be reduced to calling people non-patriotic when your own background, your own exploits lead one to question behavior on your part. What you have to do is to take into account the concerns that have been raised and try to deal with those. So what the government, I think, can do is to look at a package. We have a private sector commission that is so keen on the project, it doesn't care any hydro. let the private sector project commission commit themselves to helping to raise some funding for the equity. Okay? And we can approach both the bank, the World Bank is now back into hydros. It is funding 4 hydros in this region, I believe. We can go back to them. The IDB, there's no reason, because this has a problem, the IDB can't come back to it. The opposition is not opposed to hydro. The CDB also has an element in it there. So the government can reconstitute the package with the features that take into account the criticisms that have been raised. And I think at that point we will be quite happy to go with them and lend whatever support is required.
Then it becomes a national thing.
It becomes truly a national project.
Yeah, Chris?
Well, I'm a little bit back to your question as to where. Earlier this morning, we read in the newspapers, Citi Global saying, we today reluctantly announce our withdrawal from the project. Later on this afternoon, we read again in the Stafford News on the electricity board that that the president, and this came from the office of the president, earlier this morning, I spoke with the leader of the opposition and urged him once again to join me in showing support, etc. So is this project on or off with Citi Global, that is essentially a private equity capital, as say Bain and Bain Capital, which became Mitt Romney. Sorry?
Is Mitt Romney. Still
Yes.
is.
Yes. Whether this statement coming out of the office of the president in fact represents an official position. What the office of the president did not do, it did not say what Mr. Granger's reaction or response was.
And just before this program started, journalists called me to say that they just received notice of the APNU calling a press conference tomorrow morning.
It's a press release. Yes,
a press release saying a press conference. So we don't know, and anybody wishes. I mean, Carl, I know you're part of the hierarchy of the APNU, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I will hold him.
Let me tell you why. I tell you why I put him in the spot. If he says he doesn't know.
There's a concept of putting one's belly on pin plug. You know that concept? I believe that you're offering me to throw my belly. I have seen the press report, and I will be following it up.
This is the office of the president's press report, is that right?
I've seen, and some
I've
people
been called by the press too.
You'll be
I didn't offer any opinion. I just said I have to see what is boldly said first.
Right. In case you're joining us, this is Walter Rodney Groundings. We're talking economics today, economics for everyone. We're talking in particular about the Amila Falls project. There's some notices I need to get you involved with on the 18th. That's next week, Sunday. The 1823 Coalition will be holding a march from Le Souvenir to the parade ground, retracing that old 1823 revolution, and we're inviting everyone to come out and to join that march. It starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. We will be marching to the parade ground from Le Souvenir and end up with a rally. We're inviting all citizens to come out and to join what is called a Freedom March in observance of the 190th anniversary of the 1823 rebellion. Look out for more information on that. On the 21st of August, Buxton will be doing what is called a tribute to AUC Quayana, an evening of culture, and there'll be a symposium on the political activism and life of AUC Quayana. That's Wednesday, the 21st, at the Friendship Primary School, starting at 5:30. A cultural evening and symposium, a tribute to AUC Quayana, one of the founding fathers of our independence. Those of you in Buxton and surrounding areas on these coasts, bear that in mind on Wednesday the 21st. And of course, it's a national event, so we're inviting everyone to come out and to pay tribute to Quayana. Staying with Buxton, there'll be a public meeting on Saturday the 17th. The Buxtonians are restarting a market. That village has been without a market for the last decade. And a committee, we're working together to get that market going again from the 25th. The market will be launched on the 25th, but next Saturday, the 17th, we're holding a consultation with the community in the form of a public meeting at the Buxton Line Top at 6 o'clock Saturday afternoon, where we will discuss the market and how the community can be part of sustaining that market. So the public meeting is on Saturday the 17th, and the market will be launched the following Sunday on the 25th. We're hoping that it will be a Sunday market. So we're inviting all Buxtonians to come out and to have their input on how we move forward with that market. And of course, we've been saying all afternoon that we're taking this Amila Falls conversation onto the road. We're taking it on the road. The WPA will be starting with a symposium on Friday the 16th, that's this coming Friday, 5:30 p.m. at the St. Stanislaus College Auditorium on Brickdam, 5:30 p.m. The presenters will be, two of them are here, Carl Greenwich and Professor Thomas will be the main presenters, along with Dr. Rishi Thakur of the University of Guyana. So come out to that conversation, come out to that symposium, where we will talk in more detail, if you will, about the Amila Falls project and, of course, the Guyanese economy in general. We will also be launching on Friday a study done by Professor Thomas for the WPA on the Amila Falls project. You heard Mr. Greenwich said earlier that this project, there's a history to this project, and the project is more than simply a thing that the government just intend to spend money on. It's much more fundamental than that, and Dr. Thomas has done this study. It's called The Political Economy of the Amila Hydro Project, 8 essays, and that will be on sale at the symposium. But I think I'm advising some of you, you can call and pre-order your copy at the WPA's office, 227-4608. And of course, I've been saying over the last couple of weeks, we want to keep Groundings on air, and we've launched a Walter Rodney Groundings Fund. And I want to thank those of you who have already contributed to the Walter Rodney Groundings Fund. We have to keep this show on the air, and we're asking for donations, however small, whether it's $200 or $100, you can contribute towards keeping this program on the air. Again, you can call Rodney House, 227-4608 or 4609 to make your contribution towards keeping Walter Rodney Groundings on the air. Now back to our program here. Gentlemen, you mentioned the anti-money laundering bill, which in a sense has been put to rest for the while. Let's wake it up here, if you will, in the next couple of minutes.
I don't think we have enough time, but maybe it's worth mentioning that because of the fact that Parliament is going into recess, it won't sort of recur on the formal agenda, I expect, before October. Is that it? So we have a little time in which to develop the dialogue on that. And in pursuit of that, I'm trying to do what I did with the case of Amila. I've already done a paper for the symposium on money laundering and the money laundering situation. So I'm going to run some Starbuck News articles, maybe about 8 or 10 over that period. But coming out of this document, and then we can also have another public gathering and another document to sell.
Right. Carl, how important is the anti-money laundering thing at this particular juncture, even as we talk about the Amila?
It clearly is important internationally. It is important to Guyana, however, in the sense that if Guyana does not implement the legislation that is required of them by the regional community and the international community, they face sanctions. They will face sanctions. The issue that I want to raise is this. The substance of the bill are not likely to pose internal problems, except for, and guess what? except in the area of
The power of
governance.
the minister.
Right.
Governance. Who appoints, who disappoints, and this is to me likely to be the most important area. It is the one that APNU has indicated. This is why it is unhappy with the draft that the PPP prepared in our absence. There are other issues, but I think they turn upon this issue of governance. The other elements that are the international community would like to bring in are really not an issue. However, having said that, let me say this. What is important in Guyana is the failure of the government to have implemented the legislation, even however weak it was, when it was passed in 2000, when it was when you had a new bill in 2009, the failure of the government to even get the Financial Intelligence Unit to prepare a single report. No prosecutions, not a single report. The question really is not whether legislation is there, whether it's adequate or inadequate. It is the commitment of the government to pursuing in any serious way the question of anti-money laundering and efforts against terrorism. That has to remain in doubt.
Chris?
Well, coincidentally, in my blog today, I addressed the question of money laundering, and whilst I agree with Mr. Greenwich, the question of governance is critical. There are lots of matters in that act. The original act has a lot of issues. Perhaps it violates citizens' constitutional rights. It gives the Attorney General, a political figure, serious prosecutorial almost powers. So there are serious issues with the act itself rather than the amendments. What I recommended in my blog is that, look, the Attorney General, Parliament may have gone on recess. The Attorney General has not gone on recess, the Ministry of Legal Affairs. They should start looking at that original act to see how they would have to bring it in line with the Constitution.
I don't think they would want to. That is part
Well,
of
if they don't, Carl, if they don't, someone is going to challenge it, and then the whole structure
there
will keep
definitely are
falling down.
issues of our constitutional rights,
Yeah,
touched
but
on
you
in a
see,
variety of
even if you
things.
bring it in line with the Constitution, there's a big gap between what the Constitution provides for and what is in fact practiced in the name of the Constitution. And I think that's the failure, the potential failure of this act. It is not just governance and implementation, but the will of those with authority and capacity to see in money laundering a genuine harm to Guyana. Man, these people feel,
nobody's money.
traffic.
They think it actually helps it removes bureaucracy.
So that is where you got to win the battle.
I can't have you guys leave the program without throwing out a couple of things and get some rapid response. Skeldon and sugar. See why?
Well, as I've always said, Skeldon was a good situation when we made the decision to go ahead, but we should have cut and take the losses short term, but we've let them run long term. So now we have an industry which is producing less every year and it's costing more to produce less. The classic example of a fundamental economic contradiction in terms of the production structure of the country. So that to me is something that is past recognition in terms of even being able to rehabilitate at this stage. I think we have to cut our losses further and concentrate on the local market and perhaps the regional market, where we might be protected because of the fact that we need to sell the product in territories where they require relatively small amounts, and we can use the cost of shipping. We can use schooners, for example, rather than ocean-going vessels, to get a preferential advantage in terms of cost for supplying those markets, and that's where we should focus our production on.
Chris, Chetty Jagan?
Well, as I know it, the Parliament, the National Assembly has voted against any allocation for that project, which is highly overpriced. It wasn't properly done again. And that, in fact, and Skeldon are lessons for what we have been embarking on in Amila.
Carl, both Chetty Jagan and sugar?
Thank you. I would say that in relation to Chetty Jagan, if the government were to come back with it, we have indicated to them our concern is the airport as a priority versus the port, for example, in terms of exports. But it is the elements in there that need to be disaggregated. The runway, I think we have no problem with fixing the runway, trying to make that so forth. As regards the sugar, I think the problem here turns essentially on management, the vision and policy of the sugar sector. I think there is still hope for the international market, but work has to be done. Work has to be done to make sure that the competitiveness of the industry is restored in some way. Now they're having problems even beyond the factory. CY is right. He's saying you got problems of labor supply because you're treating it still as a low-skill industry. But I had funded some studies at CTA when I was there on Guyana's potential as a continuing supplier of sugar in the competitive market that would have followed the liberalization of sugar prices. And if serious work is done on sugar, it can be done, but you can't do it by way of the investment of 200 million to a factory that is still producing less efficiently than those built 20, 30, 50 years ago.
Yeah, the president said last weekend at the PPP's Congress that power sharing is off the table. Comments, gentlemen?
But if that's off the table, the future guide is off the table.
It's bleak.
Carl?
It's bleak. I think the future is bleak. You can't, if you're not interested in power sharing, that's the right of the PPP. But then they cannot expect, as a minority in the parliament, to get their way as though they are a majority. You have to find some mechanism for collaborating with others in the parliament if Guyana is to move forward in general. But it is imperative if you are a minority government. They're not going to get any place. The way that the way they're trying to carry out government from the minority benches, essentially, behaving as though they're a majority.
Chris?
Well, I think he also said no compromises. And
clearly,
he is practically telling the opposition in that we're not interested in talking with you.
Gentlemen, it's really been quite a program having you on. I would like to think about this as part one, so I'll follow up very shortly on a broader discussion about the political economy here. I wanted to touch on things, Carl, like the single market and economy as that relates to Guyana and so forth, and some of those things, which sometimes we neglect because we get so caught up in the national politics that we forget we exist as part of a larger region, larger hemisphere, and of course the world at large. So I want to thank you, Christopher Ram, Carl Greenwich, Professor Clive Thomas, for coming on to Walter Rodney Groundings and shedding some light and expanding this discourse on the Amila Falls project. And for you, viewing audience out there, thank you for again taking the time out to tune in to Walter Rodney Groundings. And remember, this conversation this afternoon will be expanded on Friday at 5:30 p.m. at the St. Stanislaus Auditorium. We'll be having a symposium there. It will be led by Professor Thomas and Mr. Carl Greenwich. Professor Rishi Thakur will also be there. We'll be having extensive discussion on the Amila Falls project and all the implications that arise from that. We will also be launching a study done by Professor Thomas on the political economy of the Amila Falls project. We have limited copies that will be on sale. You can pre-order your copy by calling the WPA's office at 227-4608. For you on the East Coast, remember, East Coast and Georgetown. Remember, there is the march on the 18th, the 1823 march from Le Souvenir to the parade ground. That's Sunday the 18th, starting at 7 a.m. Please turn out to that march. And those of you in Buxton, remember the tribute to AUC Guyana. It's on the 21st, Wednesday the 21st at 5 o'clock at the Friendship Primary School, the Old Roman Church School. Tribute to AUC Guyana himself, a Buxtonian. We invite all members of the community and other communities to come join us in Buxton to pay tribute to AUC Guyana. And the relaunching of the Buxton Market on the 25th, Sunday the 25th. But before that, next Saturday, there's a public meeting with the community to discuss the market there in Buxton. So you have a full menu of events over the next couple of days. Make sure that you attend as many as possible. And finally, the Walter Rodney Groundings appeal for donations to keep the program on the air. Please call the WPA's office 227-4608 or 4609 and to make your contribution. Well, this is David Hines thanking you for joining us again. And remember, our motto on this program is equality, justice, cooperation, and most importantly, exposing what goes on in the halls of government, not to make us feel good, but to enhance this country and move it to a place where all of us can be proud. Good night.
I'm impressed.